Hello everybody and welcome on in. Today I've got a Rapier sword and board build that I wanted to share with you guys. I've been playing this for the past week or so, and you know, prior to this build I've never really played with sword and board in PvP, and I gotta say it's quickly becoming one of my favorite weapons in this game. I think it's fantastic, not only defensive but offensively as well. And this build, man, this is your light armor brawler build. It is very fast, very mobile, it is packed full of stuns, it does a ton of damage, and to top it all off, this build has a crazy amount of healing power. Now, I know that we are in a pretty big ranged meta right now, and I found that this build actually does a pretty good job as a melee fighter simply because it's very fast being in light armor, and we can close those gaps and get to cover very quickly using those gap closers as well. So I definitely think the playstyle I went for on this setup reflects the fact that that's the meta that we're playing in. If you guys want to see a written guide to this build, I've got a link to it down below for you. And of course, there's a bunch of PvP commentary at the end if you want to see some more of it in action. Without further ado, let's take a look at that build. Starting off in the attributes section, 50 strength, 250 dex, 50 intelligence, and 164 constitution. Now, both Rapier and Sword and Shield are going to scale from dexterity. Rapier is primarily dexterity scaling, while Sword and Shield is actually secondary for dexterity scaling. So the dexterity setup here does do really good for our Rapier damage, but it's not as great for the Sword and Shield damage. But I think this is really made up for by the fact that we have at least 50 points in strength. Even for the Rapier, the 50 point in strength jump point, 10% damage to light and heavy physical attacks is super huge, because Rapier, at least if you're playing a Grace kit, does majority of its damage with light and heavy attacks. Now, the dexterity jump points are all really nice as well. 10% bonus to random hit damage against stunned, slowed, or rooted enemies. This is great for the sword and shield damage all around. And then we've got the 10% bonus backstab and headshot damage. Fantastic, because we can very easily land really big backstabs on this build. Dodges cost 10 less stamina. This is an absolute must-have if you're going to play a light armor full melee build. I think you got to be able to be rolling around and mobile. And then, of course, the thrust damage. This is nice, too, because both of our weapons do primarily thrust damage. Even the sword and shield, the heavy attacks that we do, as well as the leaping strike, which are our harder-hitting moves, are thrust damage. And last but not least, that crit chance from 50 dexterity. Pair that with the critical hit damage from 50 intelligence. We've got a nice crit build for both our weapons. The sword and shield on this build is actually sitting at around a 45% crit chance, so we have a very high crit chance on this build. And of course, the 50 points in intelligence is going to be nice for stacking additional Rapier damage. Honestly, this might be one of the best ways to build a non-elemental damage Rapier build for PvP, just because you get a ton of additional damage out of the 50 strength. I think you're going to get more light and heavy attack damage from this than you would if you went for the last 50 points in dexterity here. Now, the Constitution, you definitely want to have 150 con for the critical damage reduction. The consumables being stronger is also a big deal, but we'll get to that when we talk about our gear. You could try this build out with 200 plus con if you wanted and just give up that bonus random critical hit damage in dex. You'd still have great damage on this build, but I think because we're in light armor and our armor values are on the low side to begin with, the 10% increase isn't super important for this kind of a setup. Now, let's take a look at the equipment that I'm using on this build. Starting off with the Rapier, I've got the my main Rapier of choice. This is basically my best Rapier that I have in the game. It's got Shirking Abyss, Rogue, and Sundering Riposte. I think Rogue and Sundering Riposte are a must-have because we can very reliably set up backstabs with both Riposte and the hard stun from Sword and Shield. Shirking Abyss is nice because we're going to be doing a lot of rolling. It's a great secondary perk to have. However, something like Keenly Jagged or Keenly Empowered would be, I think, a better option for consistent outgoing Rapier damage. And then for the Rapier, I also have the Gambit gem here for 15% additional damage while the stamina is not full. You're going to be doing a ton of rolling on this build, so you'll have a pretty good uptime on that damage buff. And for the most part, you'll be rolling when you get behind someone to backstab, so you'll have that damage buff up at those moments. Taking a look at the sword, I've got Keen, Vicious, and Keen Speed with Strength. Now, I would actually like to have the Empowered Leaping Strike instead of Vicious here if I could, but because I didn't have access to that weapon on my server, Nobody was really selling any that were appropriate. I ended up going for this instead. Keen Speed and Keen are the two perks that I think really make this build work. Having that additional speed on the Sword and Shield bar when we crit is a huge deal, because not only does our Sword and Shield bar have a really high crit rate, if you land a crit through the Sword and Shield passives in the skill tree itself, you get another 20% haste for 5 seconds. So landing a crit with the Sword and Board on this build will give you 40% haste for 5 seconds, and then 20% haste for the next 5 seconds after that. Needless to say, if you're staying on the Sword and Shield bar on this build and you're effectively landing hits on people, you should have a really good uptime on the mobility from this, and the Keen Speed will carry over to your front bar if you do swap weapons after you get this buff. Again, I've gone with Gambit on the Sword and Shield here. The Cruel Gem I don't think makes a ton of sense, because for the most part we're going to be doing our burst with the Rapier when we go for those backstabs. And in general, I think you'll have a much better uptime with the Gambit Gem than the Cruel Gem. And then taking a look at the gear, we're going to take a look at the 3 gold pieces of armor that I have here. And these are the PvP reward track light armor reward pieces. You get Shirking Heals, Refreshing, and Resilient on all of these. Absolutely amazing for PvP, especially in light armor where we can push the healing power even further. We get an additional 10% healing power on our Sword and Shield bar as well, so we've got a net about 50% increase to our healing power. The Shirking Heals on this build with 3 pieces will heal you for over 700 health when you roll, which is really nice on a 5-second cooldown. Quite a bit of additional durability that you'll get from that. And this build rolls a lot, so it's a really nice armor pairing for that reason too. And then for my purple pieces, I have Resilient and Omnidirectional Evade, as well as Resilient and Shirking Energy. I think that Shirking Energy in light armor is a must-have on the leg pieces, so definitely go with this. A good third perk, I think, would be something like even Refreshing. This build benefits a lot from having a lot of Refreshing on it. And then, of course, Omnidirectional Evade is really nice for giving us additional damage when we use our Evade for that 2 seconds. And if you're chaining your Evades as well, this 2-second duration will stack and get longer. And then when we take a look at the shield, I've got Keen, Fortifying Shield Rush, and Vicious. I really like Fortifying Shield Rush. 32% Fortify when you hit someone with Shield Rush is no joke. It adds a ton of additional durability to one of our better defensive staggers on this build. And then Vicious and Keen just to give us even more outgoing critical chance and critical damage. The fact that you can put Keen on both the shield and the sword as well as the ring is how we have such a high crit chance on this build. And then taking a look at the jewelry, starting off with the amulet, Divine and Health are the 2 perks that you definitely want to have. And then if you can get the gold one, Shirking Dot Cleanse or Stamina Recovery are definitely the way to go. I really like Shirking Dot Cleanse because there are a ton of dots in the game right now, really high damage ones like the Poison Dot from the bow and the Bleed from the spear. They can really chunk your health for quite a bit of time. The bow one actually has a 20-second duration, so especially if you're outnumbered, you get really good usage out of this perk on the amulet. And then, of course, Stamina Recovery is just fantastic all around for stamina sustain. Taking a look at the ring, I have the Champion's Ring, which is the PvP reward track ring, and that's going to be Hardy Keen Awareness and Invigorated Punishment. Hardy Keen Awareness are the perks that you definitely want if you can't get the gold ring. Invigorated Punishment is just good all around in PvP for upping your outgoing damage, but since we do a lot of damage with light and heavy attacks on this build, Hardy Keen Awareness and Thrust damage would actually be a really good option too. And then when we take a look at the last piece of gear here, the earring, Regenerating, Refreshing Toast, and Healthy Toast. You guys told me in my last build about how OP Healthy Toast was. I'd never used mana potions before. I know that sounds kind of silly, but I didn't know they had such a short cooldown. So this is best in slot, absolutely, for a healing earring. We get regen for health over time. We get the cooldown reduction on all of our heals. And then that 9.6k of the max health when we drink a mana potion. I believe it's a 12-second cooldown or so on the mana pot, and this is around a 1700 heal if we're on our Sword and Shield bar. So almost like having an additional potion altogether with the Healthy Toast perk. Yeah, this is a huge part of the healing power on this build too. This mixed with the Shirking Heals makes this build have a ton of healing power and allows it to have a really good ability to come back from really bad situations. Now, taking a look at the resist that I've gone for with my gems, I am still running that high focus on thrust and fire damage. reduction, and then everything else has a 6.2% damage reduction. These are the two most threatening damage types in PvP, I believe, right now for light armor builds. Melee fighters you can break distance from, so you don't have to worry about as much, because especially on this build, they won't be applying a ton of pressure to you if you don't want them to. But those ranged fighters really hurt, and especially the bow players right now, you gotta have some thrust resist, I think, for PvP. And then, of course, you want to run your best consumables on this build. I'll just fix what I have here. Health potions, regen potions, and last but not least, those mana potions. And then I've gone with the strong gemstone dust. Seeing as I have more thrust damage resist than the fire damage resist, I do like the gemstone as an option. Plus, ice can be pretty threatening at times too. We are a full melee build, so we can get trapped by an ice player if we're too aggressive. So I like the gemstone dust for those situations as well. And then you are going to need to run an attribute food that gives you 40 additional attribute points. Whatever you use is up to you, as long as you can get the desired stat spread that we're looking for. I've got the Fall Harvest Turkey here. And last but not least, a Honing Stone to up your outgoing damage as well. Alright, so let's take a look at the skill trees that I'm running for my weapons here. Starting off with the Rapier, I've got my standard Grace tree. I know, I absolutely love playing Rapier with this setup. We've got Riposte, we've got Evade, we've got Flesh. Fantastic defensive and offensive utility for all of these skills. Riposte applying that super nasty rend into a very powerful backstab. Evade, need I say more? This is one of the best skills that Rapier has. And then Flesh being a really good gap closer. Having the combo of 2 gap closers is really nice for the mobility, especially since we're a full melee build. And then for the passives on the Rapier tree, I've taken a lot of passives that focus on cooldown reduction, adding haste to our attacks on the Rapier, and then returning stamina as well. And then last but not least, the final damage perk here, 10% more damage when our opponent is greater than 50% health. I believe this is the best option out of the 3 damage perks that we have a choice of here. And then taking a look at the sword and shield setup that I have here. So starting off on the right-hand side, we've got Shield Rush. This is fantastic, not only because you have grit when you use it, and it moves your character a decent distance, about as far as Evade moves you, but it will stagger anybody that you hit, and thanks to our shield perk, it will give us a big Fortify buff when we use it. So that goes a long way on this build. And Shield Bash, of course, fantastic for that hard stun that it applies. The additional duration on the stun is very important because when we can set up that Shield Bash on someone, we can roll behind them and hit them with a super nasty backstab from the Rapier. And then for the last skill, we've got Leaping Strike. It has a pretty quick cooldown. It staggers when it hits your opponent. It's a very fast gap closer, and it does quite a bit of damage when it hits your opponent as well. And last but not least, it will apply slow, which will up the damage of this build thanks to the passives that we have. This is really nice offensive and defensively. Again, I actually really like Leaping Strike for delivering that finishing hit when your opponent is very low on hit points. Flesh can be a little trickier to land at that situation. Leaping Strike is just going to be faster and more consistent when you want to land that hit. Now, the passives on my sword and board. In the Defender tree, we've got the 15 additional stamina from Invigorating Bulwark whenever we land an attack with Shield Bash or Shield Rush. This is really nice because it adds more durability and stam sustain to our build. And then, of course, the 10% additional healing when we're on the sword and board bar. I don't do it very well in the footage, but if you do play this build a lot, try to make a point to use your healing items when you are on your sword and shield bar versus the rapier bar. And then for the Sword Master tree, I've gone really heavy with the passives here because I really wanted that leadership passive at the very end. So yeah, the successful heavy attacks granting us 30% empower from empowered stab is huge. Sword and Board, I think, plays a very heavy attack kind of centric offensive style where you try to go for a lot of heavy attacks. The heavy attack not only hits pretty hard and gives you empower, but it has quite a bit of lunge distance, so you can use it to set up your other stuns or moves. The next one we have is Achilles Heel. The final light attack in the light attack chain will inflict a 20% slow for 2 seconds. That pairs in again with the Opportunist passive that we have down here. I'll just mention it now. 10% more damage against slowed foes, so we got some nice synergy from our Leaping Strike, from our light attack chain, and of course from Shield Rush, which will apply the slow as well. The next one we have is Freeing Justice. A heavy attack will cause you to lose 1 debuff. Again, we have a very heavy attack-centric playstyle with the offensive sword and board setup, so this is really nice. This build actually has a ton of anti-damage over time and debuff thanks to the necklace that we're running, as well as freeing justice. And then we've got precision, increase sword and shield critical strike chance by 10%. I lied earlier, this build has like 55% crit chance. It's not 45, it's really good. And then we've got confidence. While health is full, you deal 15% more damage. I maybe could have gone for a different passive instead of that. I don't use a lot of blocks, so I didn't see me using counterattack very effectively on this build. The round shield is also not a super fantastic option for blocking. It is a little better than most weapons, but it's not as good as the tower shield. So confidence, just for that additional damage like that, especially if we're hunting someone down and they're trying to escape, we're likely going to be at full health ourselves. And then critical precision on crit, we gain 20% haste for 5 seconds, and this is massive for this build. 40% haste when we land a critical hit, thanks to keen speed as well. Really nice. And then, of course, leadership for that 10% damage bonus. Alright guys, so let's get right into that PvP commentary. I've got a handful of clips for you guys today, starting off with the first one here, some open world PvP. I'll be honest man, open world PvP is some of the best PvP in this game, and it is so common now. Everybody's out here PvPing because it's one of the best ways to get your PvP track rewards up. And yeah, as you guys can see, right off the bat, just kind of flexing the damage of the build. The enemy player turned around to attack and then go into a flamethrower. We're just going to DPS him down with the Rapier. And then I right away jump on top of this enemy healer. When playing with the sword and board, I found that I had a lot more success using heavy attacks than I did trying to use too many light attacks. If someone's trying to run away, the tracking on the light attacks are really awesome for staying on top of them. But the heavy attack gives you that 30% in power, and that's a huge part of setting up the combos. There you see I get a lot of damage into that healer just with my Rapier, and then he ends up trying to retreat, and the heavy attack getting him on the riposte. Such a great way to deal with riposte is to use a staggered attack like that. And then the enemy player here jumps on top of me. I get a good riposte off on him, but he right away goes to retreat, and he ends up blowing his stam, and I go for the heavy attack. There's a great example where we could have caught him with the light attack, and that would have put him within range of our stun with no stamina. And that would have been a pretty dangerous situation for that player. But either way, I just continue to chase these guys. I actually peel off on top of this enemy player here because he is a little bit on the slower side. Enemy hammer player coming in with that stun. Riposte doing what it needs to do to save me. And then I go for that big heavy attack to evade in. And then flesh through, and another flesh for the finish. And that allows me to get a huge backstab on the hammer player. And then switch to the sword and board leaping strike on top of him. And you can see that clip there, just the speed, the aggression of this build, and how quickly you can put damage in and bring people down. And now moving on to this next clip. This one here is a little bit of a different fight because I wanted to showcase the strategy / defensive gameplay of this build. So these guys are all standing on the flag, and I'm in a very exposed position if I jump into the middle there. But I'm also a melee fighter, so my only option is to be close to these guys if I want to have any chance of killing them. And the way to do that is to dive in and out and just try to pull them away from each other, try to get them to split up. This is something that I did a lot of in my time playing ESO, so I'm very used to this kind of tactic, but these guys here aren't as used to it. You see that he's already putting stuff in chat. That's always a sign that I'm going to be able to get some of these guys to peel off. So I just continue to wait around at the top. I go for the gap close in, not necessarily to hit someone or do any damage, but just get close and get these guys to chase me a little bit. Again, the enemy players start to come off the flag, and I just do a little bit of a tactical retreat. I don't want to sit in all that ranged fire, but I can LOS it using the bit of rampart here. And you see, I try to go for the leaping strike on this guy. My tracking actually pulls me towards the target dummy in the fort there, so I end up getting a weird leaping strike down, but that's okay. I head to the top, and I get trapped in the ice shower. I end up rolling out of it and then flesh right back through to get to the other side of these guys. And there's a nice direction change on them again, and you see that only 2 enemy players end up deciding to stick on top of me here. The other ones head back to the flag, and I managed to connect a nice stun off the sword and board on that Void Gauntlet player, and he gives me the slip, unfortunately, and I roll off the edge, so I'm not able to capitalize on that. I come back up to the top, go for that heavy attack, seeing that he's going to be out of range, right away cancel into the leaping strike. and then I go for the riposte after getting trapped in the ice shower, evade out of that, and then I head into the doorway here just to LOS again. This guy goes for the multi-shot on the bow. I do have grit when I use the stun on Sword and Board, so I'm able to get the stun reliably on him, get the backstab, and then as he tries to escape, the leaping strike from behind for almost 4k, and I managed to bring that first guy down. And now a few of them have headed out of the keep here, and there's just 3 of them left on the flag. One guy heads for the door, and I'm just going to jump right on top now. The odds are a lot more in my favor, seeing as a majority of their range players are also gone too. And these guys start putting some pressure into me. I'm just going to be patient. Again, using the heavy attack from the Sword and Board to set up my combos on it. It's not something I did a lot in my early gameplay, but in my later gameplay, lots of success with it. And that Empower is so great for dealing damage. There you see again, I land the heavy. He ends up going for the block when I go for the stagger off the shield rush. And then I go for the riposte in front of these guys. Just unlucky with my ripostes in this fight. That being said, though, riposte is a fantastic tool just for getting a bit of stamina back and putting yourself in that defensive position for about a second. And these guys here, they're trying to kite me out, and I'm just putting those heavy attacks in. Catch him with his guard down on the Rapier heavy. Right away, go for the evade into him and get really good damage into the spear player. But I do kind of get snared by the Ice Gauntlet guy there. The spear player ends up healing up. And I just continue to apply pressure, flesh through them, go for the roll, and there's the stagger off of the leaping strike into the stun, and a big, not a backstab actually, I didn't manage to get fully behind him, but it's enough damage to bring him really close. I hit him with the poke in the end. And the last guy here, the one who had so much to say, ends up running away when it's one-on-one, but we're not going to let him get away that easily. He ends up hiding inside of his stuff here. I hit him with the bash off the Sword and Board. Big damage from the backstab on the Rapier into the flesh combo, and he's very low health here. And Leaping Strike, not doing me justice this time. I don't know, this fight, me and Leaping Strike didn't get along very well. So I end up hitting the tree with it. He's going to continue to try to run away, but I do hunt him down. And there you see the tracking on the light attack, like I said. A lot better to get someone with that than even the Rapier light attack when they're trying to get away. And I bring the last guy down. I end up coming back towards the keep and queuing for an OPR, and 2 enemy players end up popping up out of nowhere. They might have been in an OPR themselves, and I just end up fighting them on the flag here. I get a great riposte to start off, but I shouldn't have been so aggressive afterwards. I was trying to put some really big damage into them. I did manage to do quite a bit of damage, but they healed up right away. The Void Gauntlet player kind of on my tail there, but this guy goes for that rapid shot on the bow. I right away hit him with the stagger on the shield bash. Having that grit on it means that I won't get hit by the stagger on his shot as well, and a good riposte on that guy there. I go for the flesh through, don't manage to connect the flesh on the player that I initially riposted, but I get a good backstab on the other player, and just a bit of target switching there to land that shield bash. End up getting the stun into the backstab, bring that guy down. And this last player here, he again tries to run away, but I stay right on top of him using the speed from the gap closers. He is definitely not going to be able to escape if he's not staying predominantly on his bow bar here. And yeah, he ends up rolling too much. His stam is down. I'm going to stay on top of him. Leaping Strike doing no justice for me again. But either way, we managed to bring him down with a few more light attacks, and that was the end of that fight. Now for the last fight here, I've got kind of the intro clip, and it had a little bit more to it that I'll show you guys. Starting the fight off, I ended up respawning at a camp after dying here, and I end up fighting against this enemy spear bow player. He played really well. I had quite a few fights against this guy, and I found him to be a very tricky opponent to fight. And in this particular exchange, I ended up getting the stun to start it off, and he gets put on the back foot right away, and I just keep the pressure on top of him. I wanted to include the beginning of this fight because bow spear is a very common weapon combo right now, and the bow is hard to catch, but you can see that he is not able to escape my build. I'm going to stay right on top of him, and I basically am going to force him to fight me. He's not going to be able to break that distance. He goes for the multi-shot. I probably should have gone for the shield bash there. I might have been able to reach him with it, and I would have had the resistance to the stagger. Either way, I do land the stagger there, and another enemy player ends up coming in the fight here, and I'm just doing a bit of evasive maneuvers to try to kite out the bow player. I jump on top of the other player. He's not attacking, but I know he was going to go for that. He ends up hitting me with the stun. Right away, I go for the riposte, catch him on it, get some good damage on the backstab, and 2 more players come into the fight. I get knocked back by the hammer player, and then right away switch into the sword and board. I do land that stun, but I don't do anything on it. Just kind of taking advantage of the defensive help that it gave me. Jumping on top of these guys, do land the riposte. There's a big backstab into the evade light attack. I roll backwards, right away flesh through, and that put a lot of damage into almost all the players there. Basically 3 of them at half life off of that combo. He hits me with the stun. I right away go for the sword and board stun. I probably should have gone for riposte. I would have saved myself a lot of additional health there and still landed that stun. But either way, I did manage to get a little bit of offensive pressure with that, and I catch a nice riposte on the hammer player coming in. I don't try to go for the heavy attack off of that, knowing that I don't have time in this kind of high pressure situation, and do connect the 2 light attacks and then just finish him off there with the flesh. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I cannot target people on the ground this patch. With my rapier or my sword and shield, I'm having a lot of trouble. But either way, I managed to bring 2 of the players down, continue to apply pressure to these guys. But yeah, the 2 ranged opponents, and I get caught by a lot of attacks in a row. And I probably should have tried to take some terrain advantage throughout the course of that fight, but I don't know. I was lost in the moment, just being very aggressive, and I think it does showcase the aggression that this build excels at. And finally, for the last fight, I've got another bit of open world PvP, and this one just showcases the build being that kind of frontline brawler fighter. It's not insanely tanky or anything, but we're very agile, we've got a lot of healing power, and as long as you make smart moves, you can fight even open field against multiple targets with this setup. And as you can see here, I'm fighting inside of this outpost, and I've got a friendly player, not on my faction, but actually on the purple faction, that's shooting arrows at these guys as I just fight them in the middle of the flag. So I will let you guys enjoy this fight as I say goodbye. Again, if you want to see a written guide to this build, there's a link to it down below. And of course, if you want to see other builds from me, as well as some information on New World, you can find it on my website, pvpnewworld.com. If you give me a follow on Twitter, you can keep up to date with me, and of course, if you want to see some live gameplay every now and then, you can give me a follow on Twitch. I do a New World Top 5 Battle Series. If you guys have some awesome fights that you want to see in a Top 5, or if you have a build that you want to see featured on the channel, you can send that to Kristofer at pvpnewworld.com. This show is sponsored by What the Fast. It's a VPN for gamers that can give you better ping to your favorite games, free to try for the first month. There's a link down below for you guys. And last but not least, a massive thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon for supporting the show. Thank you everybody just for tuning in and watching today. I hope that you guys enjoyed the build, and I hope you're looking forward to something in the future as well. I am not playing this build anymore. I have already moved on, so look forward to that. Have a great night, everybody, and I'll see you next time.